Imagine you spent decades building the most sophisticated shield in modern military history. Layers upon layers of interceptors. Billions of dollars. Decades of engineering. The system the whole world studied, copied, and admired as the gold standard of missile defense. Now imagine that, in June 2025, this shield was put to the ultimate test, and the numbers that came to light changed everything experts thought they knew. This isn't science fiction. It's not military forum speculation. It's what happened to Israel. For decades, the world watched the Israel Defense Forces build what became known as the most sophisticated air defense grid on the planet. At the base, the Iron Dome created to shoot down unguided rockets and short-range mortars, with a success rate that impressed global analysts. Above it, David's Sling for medium-range threats. Then came the Arrow 2 for ballistic missiles within the atmosphere, and at the top of the pyramid, the Arrow 3, an exo-atmospheric interceptor capable of taking down missiles in space, long before they got anywhere near Israeli territory. 4 layers. Redundancy upon redundancy. The logic was simple. Even if a missile slipped past one layer, the others would catch it. It was a system designed to never fail. In June 2025, Iran launched over 200 ballistic missiles at Israel in a sequence that became known as the 12-Day War. And what the data revealed was a shock. Not because the system failed completely, but because the numbers showed, for the first time in real combat conditions, exactly where its limits were. The Iron Dome intercepted between 20 and 30% of the ballistic missiles. That means 70 to 80% made it through. And it gets worse. The Arrow 3, the elite layer, the top of the pyramid, burned through 60 to 70% of its entire available stockpile in a single engagement. A single conflict. A single 12-day war. And the most sophisticated layer of the shield was left nearly empty. The question this raises is devastating. If this is what happened in June 2025, what happens in the next war? But the story didn't stop there. On March 1, 2026, Iran announced the operational deployment of the Fateh 2A hypersonic glide vehicle, whose physical properties make kinetic interception functionally impossible. Not difficult. Not expensive. Impossible. Analysts from the FPRI and independent missile defense experts reached a conclusion in March 2026 that no one wanted to publish. A 100% interception rate against the combination of threats Iran now possesses is an insurmountable mathematical barrier. In this video, you'll understand the physics that make this true and what that means for any adversary already calculating what to do with this information. Let's start with what the numbers from the 12-Day War actually mean, because most of the analysis you'll find fails miserably at reading them. When the Iron Dome was developed and became operational, it was designed for a specific problem: unguided rockets, mortar shells, and short-range missiles. That was Israel's real threat environment at the time. Groups like Hamas and Hezbollah fired these weapons in sheer volume, and the Iron Dome was optimized to deal with exactly that threat profile. The system works with a radar that tracks the incoming projectile, a computer that calculates the trajectory and determines if the missile will land in a populated area, and, if so, launches 2 Tamir interceptors toward the target. The officially announced interception rate was consistently above 90% against the threats the system was designed for. The problem is that ballistic missiles aren't rockets. They are a completely different category of threat. A Qassam or Grad rocket flies on a relatively simple trajectory, comparatively slow and well within the atmosphere. The Iron Dome has time to calculate, decide, and respond. A ballistic missile follows a parabolic arc trajectory, hits speeds during its descent phase that are multiples of the speed of sound, and the time available to react is a fraction of what you have against conventional rockets. This isn't a system failure. The Iron Dome does what it was built to do, with absolute excellence. The problem is that it was deployed to defend against threats it wasn't designed for, and the difference in the numbers showed that in real time. In June 2025, this limitation became operationally critical. The shortfall had to be covered by the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3, the systems actually built for ballistic missiles. And that's exactly where the second problem revealed itself. The Arrow 3 burned through 60 to 70% of its entire stockpile in a single engagement. In the weeks following the conflict, Israeli authorities didn't release precise numbers publicly, but analysts from the FPRI and Specialized Defense think tanks compiled estimates from partial statements and independent analysis. The consensus reached an uncomfortable conclusion. The system survived the 12-day war, but it reached the end of it with its sustainment capacity severely compromised. With the Arrow 3 at 30 or 40% capacity and the Iron Dome exposed against ballistics, any subsequent conflict would begin with Israel at a serious disadvantage. But to understand why the situation is even worse than the numbers from the 12-day war suggest, there is a previous data point that almost no one connects to this story, and once you understand it, it will change how you view everything that came after. Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy in Lebanon, conducted an unofficial saturation test of the Iron Dome even before the 12-day war. In a single coordinated salvo of over 100 rockets, the Iron Dome's interception rate dropped to approximately 50%. 50%. With the system operating within its projected threat range, unguided rockets, exactly the type it was designed for. What happened? Volume. Pure and simple volume overload. The Iron Dome has a limited number of batteries. Each battery has a limited number of interceptors. The system needs time between launches to reload, reposition, and recalibrate. When a large enough salvo is launched in a coordinated manner, it simply overwhelms the system's response capacity. Not because the technology failed, but because the math doesn't add up. And it was Hezbollah that demonstrated this. With rockets. No precision guidance, no hypersonic speed, no evasive maneuvers, just volume. The lingering question after the Hezbollah precedent was this: if volume alone breaks the Iron Dome against simple threats, what happens when you add a missile that the Arrow can't even track properly? The answer arrived on March 1st, 2026, and it has a name: Fatah 2. To understand what makes the Fatah 2 different from any other threat Israel has faced, the vice president of the company that manufactures the Iron Dome said something in August 2025 that captures the problem better than any technical analysis. We'll get to that quote. But first, you need to understand the basic physics of how kinetic interceptors work. Because it's those physics that make his statement so definitive. Every missile defense system in existence today, the Arrow, the American THAAD, the Russian S-400, operates on the same fundamental logic. The radar detects the incoming missile. The system calculates the trajectory. The interceptor is launched to a predicted meeting point in the future. The interceptor has to reach that point at the exact same time as the target. The key word is predicted. The entire system relies on the ability to predict where the target will be. Conventional ballistic missiles make this job easier. After the propulsion phase, they follow a deterministic parabolic trajectory. You measure the trajectory, calculate where the missile will be in 30, 60, 90 seconds, and send the interceptor to that point. It's classical Newtonian physics. A hypersonic glide vehicle is a completely different category. The Fatah 2 operates in the hypersonic range, speeds above Mach 5. But speed, in and of itself, isn't what makes interception impossible. Speed is a technical challenge. Advanced systems can handle it within certain limits. What makes the Fatah 2 different is the combination of speed with maneuverability during flight. The hypersonic glide vehicle doesn't follow a fixed ballistic trajectory. It can execute pitch and yaw corrections, changes in angle of attack and lateral direction, mid-flight, fully within the hypersonic regime. This means that the trajectory you calculated based on the first few seconds of detection could be completely different from the missile's actual trajectory 2 seconds later. And that breaks the fundamental logic of kinetic interception. If you can't predict where the missile will be, you can't send the interceptor to the correct meeting point. It's like trying to hit a target that is no longer where it was when you pulled the trigger. Yuval Baseski, vice president of Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, the Israeli company that manufactures the Iron Dome and is one of the country's leading developers of interception systems, captured this problem with an analogy that stuck. In August 2025, he said, "It's like trying to block LeBron James with a single defender. It's not a matter of skill or technology. It's a matter of geometry and physics. A kinetic interceptor simply cannot process and respond to hypersonic trajectory changes in real time." An executive from the Israeli defense industry itself saying this publicly. It's not outside analysis. It's an industry admission that the problem exists on a physical level, not just a technical one. Iran didn't get here overnight. The first-generation Fatah was first used in the 12-day war of June 2025. Even the Fatah 1 already featured hypersonic characteristics, but the Fatah 2, deployed in March 2026, represents a specific evolution. The upgrade was developed with an explicit goal: to defeat the Arrow 2, the Arrow 3, and the American THAAD. This isn't an inference. It's what the Iranian announcement itself declared, and it closes the loop left open in the previous section. If volume alone takes down the Iron Dome, and now there is a missile that can't be reliably tracked by the Arrow, the combination of these two things represents something qualitatively different from any previous threat. But there's a dimension that goes beyond physics and is equally urgent. Pay attention to this detail, because this is where everything changes. Missile economics. The Arrow 3 is one of the most sophisticated systems ever put into an interceptor. It has to leave the atmosphere, locate a target at ballistic speeds in space, and destroy it by kinetic impact. Hit to kill in technical terms. Producing a single unit costs between $2 and $3 million, depending on the estimates. Some calculations reach even higher. An Iranian medium-range ballistic missile costs a fraction of that to produce. The cost asymmetry between an offensive projectile and a defensive interceptor is an order of magnitude. What does this mean in strategic terms? If Iran spends $100 million on offensive missiles, Israel needs to spend multiples of that amount on interceptors to try and cover the threat. And that assumes the interceptors actually work. After the 12-day war, the Arrow 3 was left with 30 to 40% of its original stockpile. The production line to replenish this inventory doesn't operate in weeks. It doesn't necessarily operate in months either. Restocking highly sophisticated interceptors involves complex supply chains, specialized components sourced from multiple countries, and time that no political timeline can buy. Compare this to the offensive side. Iran can produce medium-range ballistic missiles on an industrial scale, using technology that has already been absorbed and replicated domestically. The offensive production cycle and the defensive replenishment cycle operate on completely different timelines. And this difference in speed is an integral part of the strategy. Now do the math for a multiple wave scenario. If in the first wave Iran uses 200 missiles and drains 60 to 70% of the Arrow 3, what does Israel use to defend against the second wave? And the third? Modern conflicts rarely end in a single exchange of salvos. An adversary who knows they can deplete defensive stockpiles in the first wave has an obvious incentive to follow up with subsequent waves. The ratio between offensive cost and defensive cost isn't just a financial problem. It's a chronic strategic vulnerability. And the FPRI analysts who studied the numbers from the 12-day war were blunt. A war of attrition in terms of interceptor stockpiles systematically favors the offensive side. The picture we've just painted is mathematically grim. But Israel isn't standing still. Let's look at what's currently in motion, because it's exactly the timing of the responses that reveals the true scale of the problem. On February 11, 2026, the Israeli military announced a significant upgrade to David's Sling, the medium-range interception system of their defensive grid. Following the upgrade, David's Sling demonstrated an interception rate of over 90% against isolated threats. 90%. That is an impressive number. But isolated threats aren't the real threat scenario. David's Sling, much like other kinetic interceptors, deals with the same volume problem that the Iron Dome suffers from on a larger scale. Against coordinated salvos multiple targets coming in simultaneously from different angles, the system has to sequence its engagements. And when the queue of targets exceeds the system's capacity for simultaneous processing and response, the remaining targets slip through. The February 2026 upgrade improved David's Sling significantly. But the fundamental weakness against coordinated saturation remains. 4 days later, on February 15, 2026, Israel announced the start of active testing for the Arrow 4. And here is the point that matters most in this story. The Arrow 4 was designed specifically to address the problem of hypersonic vehicles. It is the direct answer to the Fatah. The Fatah 2 was operationally deployed on March 1, 2026, 13 days. The Arrow 4 entered active testing 13 days before the Fatah 2 became operational. It isn't finished. It hasn't gone through the full cycle of testing and certification. It hasn't been produced in sufficient quantities to equip defense batteries. It is not operational. This is what defense acquisition experts call the threat cycle versus the development cycle, and the asymmetry is systemic. The adversary can deploy a new offensive weapon in weeks or months after it leaves the lab. The defense system responding to it requires full cycles of testing, certification, scaled production, and operational training, which means years, not weeks. As of March 15, 2026, today Israel has no operational interceptor designed for the hypersonic threat. The Arrow 4 is in testing. The Arrow 3 stockpile is partially depleted. David's Sling has its limits against saturation, and the Iron Dome has been exposed as inadequate against ballistic missiles. What's left? The final layer of Israeli defense that isn't Israeli. The THAAD System Terminal High Altitude Area Defense is an American ballistic missile interception system. The United States deployed THAAD batteries in Israel in October 2024 and reinforced that presence in April 2025. The American presence is real, and it represents an additional layer of protection that exists beyond purely Israeli capabilities. But there are 3 problems with THAAD as the ultimate backstop for Israeli defense. First, coverage. THAAD was designed for high-altitude terminal phase interception. It shoots down missiles in their final descent phase at high altitudes. It has geographic and angular coverage limitations, meaning it doesn't provide complete coverage of Israeli airspace. There are zones and trajectories that fall outside its effective engagement envelope. Second, politics. The American presence in Israel involves American operators. This creates a political dimension that limits how and when the system can be employed. In an escalation scenario, decisions to use THAAD go through Washington, not just Tel Aviv. Third, and most relevant, Iran explicitly stated that the Fatah 2 was developed to penetrate the Arrow and THAAD systems. This wasn't a detail omitted from the deployment announcement of the Fatah 2 in March 2026. It was the central point of the announcement. Iran didn't deploy a new weapon, without saying what it was developed to counter. This doesn't mean THAAD is automatically ineffective against the Fatah II. Iran has incentives to overstate its weapons capabilities in public statements, and no weapon system performs exactly as its manufacturer claims. But it raises a question that defense analysts take seriously. If an adversary dedicated specific effort and resources to developing a missile that defeats a given system, what is the realistic confidence rate that this system still works against that specific missile? And when you combine this question with everything we've seen so far, you arrive at what FPRI analysts called the inevitable conclusion in March 2026. Let's put the whole puzzle together. Iran has two independent defeat mechanisms. Mechanism 1, saturation, launching enough volume to overwhelm the response capacity of any defensive layer. Hezbollah demonstrated that this works with simple rockets. Iran demonstrated it on a larger scale with ballistics in June 2025. Mechanism 2, maneuverable hypersonics, launching a projectile that doesn't follow a predictable trajectory, making kinetic interception by trajectory prediction impossible. Each of these mechanisms individually already poses a serious challenge to any existing defense grid. But they aren't just additive, they're multiplicative. Here's why. Against saturation, defense runs on time. You need to sequence engagements, process multiple targets, and reload. With enough time, saturation is manageable. Against maneuverable hypersonics, defense runs on precision. You need to calculate where the target will be and send the interceptor to that exact spot. When you combine the two, these requirements collapse directly. The system is trying to process multiple simultaneous targets, and each of those targets is changing its trajectory unpredictably. The available time has dropped. The required precision has spiked. Both movements happen at the same time. The result is catastrophically unfavorable for the defense. You need more time than you have, and more precision than is physically possible to achieve simultaneously. The consensus among specialized analysts in March 2026 is unequivocal. FPRI analysts, independent missile defense experts, and the very operational data from the 12-day war all point in the same direction. A 100% interception rate against the combination of saturation and a hypersonic glide vehicle is considered impossible with currently available technologies. Israel has no zone defense capability, the kind of defense that ensures no projectile reaches its territory against this specific combination. This is not the scenario of a temporarily degraded system. It's the structural collapse of a paradigm. This is what structurally broken means. It doesn't mean the system doesn't work. It still intercepts threats. It will still shoot down a fraction of incoming projectiles. But there's a critical difference between temporarily degraded and structurally broken. A temporarily degraded system is one that failed due to specific circumstances that can be corrected. Low stock that can be replenished. A technical flaw that can be fixed. An operational error that can be trained out. The temporary condition can be resolved. A structurally broken system is one where the adversary has identified and exploited an inherent limitation in the defense's design, one that cannot be resolved within the current paradigm. Saturation is an inherent limitation of any system based on kinetic interceptors with a finite stockpile. The inability to intercept unpredictable hypersonic trajectories is a limitation of the physics of existing interceptors. Arrow 4 could change this equation once it's operational, tested, certified, and produced in sufficient quantities. Defense researchers are also working on alternative approaches: high-energy laser interception, directed microwave systems, and other technologies that don't rely on kinetic trajectory prediction. But none of these solutions exist on an operational scale today, and none have a confirmed deployment date. On March 15, 2026, the gap between the deployed threat and the available defense is real and measurable. And this shifts the geopolitical calculus in ways that go far beyond technology. The link that connects the physics of missiles with the decisions of war and peace is called deterrence. And what just changed in Israel's defensive system has broken that logic in a very specific way. Deterrence is a concept that works on a simple premise. If you know you will suffer unacceptable consequences by attacking, you don't attack. For decades, Israel's defense grid functioned as a component of that deterrence. Not because it made the country invulnerable, no system does that, but because it raised the cost and uncertainty of any attack to the point where the aggressor's calculus became unfavorable. When an adversary knows that its missiles will get through not all of them, but a significant fraction, enough to produce the desired effects, that calculus changes completely. Iran, in March 2026, knows some operational facts that it didn't know prior to June 2025. It knows that the Arrow 3 stockpile can be depleted in a single exchange of salvos. It knows that the Iron Dome is not effective against ballistics at scale. It knows that Arrow 4 is not operational. It knows that zone defense capability against saturation and hypersonic weapons does not exist. Hezbollah knows. Other regional actors tracking the development of Iranian capabilities know. And this knowledge isn't kept secret. It circulates in intelligence analyses, in briefings for allied governments, in specialized publications from think tanks monitoring military capabilities. It factors into the risk models that every actor uses when calculating the cost of an escalation, when negotiating concessions, when deciding where to deploy resources. For Israel, this creates a profound strategic problem. The traditional response when defense is inadequate is to strengthen the offensive posture deterrence not through defense, but through the threat of retaliation. Israel clearly has significant offensive capabilities, including nuclear capability, according to widely accepted Western analyses, although not officially confirmed. But exclusive reliance on an offensive posture represents a qualitative shift in security doctrine. There are other courses of action: diplomatic pressure and sanctions to slow down the Iranian missile program, reinforced cooperation with the United States to accelerate the development of the Arrow 4 and increase the presence of Thayad, internal development of alternative interception technologies like high-energy lasers, where Israel has active investment, and the possibility of preemptive action against Iranian missile infrastructure, which carries its own escalation risks. But none of these options solve the problem in the short term. The Arrow 4 needs time. Directed energy technologies need even more time. Diplomacy operates in slow cycles, and preemptive action brings risks that complicate any calculation. The real question left unanswered isn't technological. It's strategic and existential. The question we posed right at the beginning, what happens in the next war, now has a partial answer. The next war begins with Israel, at a structural disadvantage in interception. What still has no answer is what this does to the calculations of other actors. When an adversary is reasonably certain that their missiles will get through, what does that do to the deterrence structure that kept a volatile region in relative peace? What happens to the weapons programs of Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the Emirates when the defense standard that served as a demonstrable benchmark stops working as a benchmark? This shift in calculation is the next piece of this story, and it's what we'll unpack in the next video. If you want to be here when it drops, subscribe to the channel right now.